Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Deus Ex The Fall for PC, Android, and iOS. This is a hybrid of first-person shooter and RPG mechanics that was developed by Eidos Montreal and Infusion Interactive and published by Square Enix first for iOS in July of last year. It was later ported to Android and PC, with the PC version receiving the absolute worst reception. And not all of it is unjustified. I will get to that in a moment. That said, when this game was first announced, people were ecstatic up until they realized that it wasn't a proper follow-up to Deus Ex Human Revolution, which was a really, really good game, and a great return to form for the Deus Ex series. Then this happened. And at first we were excited because, hey, a new Deus Ex game that fills in more of the story between things that are going on? Great! And then we found out it was iOS only at the time. Oh, nobody was happy about that. Then we found out that it was getting ported to PC. And when the PC version came out, it quickly became known by its nickname of Deus Ex The Fail. So, I guess the question here is, does this game actually fail miserably at everything? Or did they do some things that were good? Or what really happened here? Was it just an issue of it being an iOS port? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it looks like an iOS game, which is not good when you've got the PC version. The texture quality is terrible. It looks like a game several years older than it actually is. The modeling is awful as well. A lot of things are rather blocky, and in this day and age, that's pretty impressive that they actually managed to make it as blocky as they did. And so things end up being fairly undetailed in a lot of respects. The animations are probably the worst offender, though. They are downright atrocious. They just clip through things all the time. The lip syncing is horrible. The movement of characters just is incredibly unnatural. All of it looks terrible. And it really just becomes headache-inducing when the game's glitches come into play with the animations as well, where you have things like the screen bugging out due to recoil and things like that, which they never really sorted those issues out all the way. I never really understood what caused that to begin with, and it apparently is something that the developers don't even seem to know what really caused it, because they never fully fixed it. And that makes the game kind of infuriating to play a lot of the time, because you're sitting there and all of a sudden the screen starts bugging out because you had the audacity to fire a pistol. Oh my god! It's ridiculous. And then there's the sound design. The sound design's a horrid mess. The music, what little of it isn't ripped directly from Deus Ex Human Revolution and just completely recycled, is pretty uninspired. It's in the same sort of vein, just not very good. And so the music itself just feels like you've been there, done that. It doesn't really add anything to the game, which is a real shame because the music in Deus Ex Human Revolution was fantastic. But here, reused like that, it's just tedious, really. The sound effects themselves are generally quite wimpy. Some of them are reused, some of them aren't. And the ones that are reused generally are okay, but the actual sound effects that you'll see that are new are pretty pathetic. And there's also some weird sound glitches here and there where the sounds don't all play right. It seems to be an issue with it not being able to play a certain number of sounds at once, and so that makes the game just kind of bug out with the sound as well a lot of the time. And then there's the voice acting. Now, Deus Ex Human Revolution generally had really good voice acting. There were a few here and there that were pretty terrible, but by and large, most of the characters were extremely well voiced, and that was one of its biggest strengths, really. This game doesn't have it. In fact, the voice acting in this game is pretty terrible. So, the presentation leaves a lot to be desired. Terrible voice acting, terrible animations, the visuals are just awful in general. There's just this pathetic implementation of the Deus Ex Human Revolution art style into what was clearly a game released for very much weaker hardware. and the PC version is just a straight up iOS port rather than a proper rebuild of the game for PC and taking advantage of PC. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is that you play as Ben Saxon, who is a former Australian Special Forces guy who ended up falling in with the squad known as the Tyrants, which you dealt with in Deus Ex Human Revolution. And they are led by Jaren Namir. Again, someone you encountered in Human Revolution. And this is basically a sort of prequel to the events of Human Revolution. And the basic idea of the story is that you and this other character named Anna Kelso are hiding from the conspirators, the Illuminati, basically, and the Tyrants, after Ben defected from the Tyrants and got involved with the conspiracy and tried to oust it and that sort of thing. And so you're currently in hiding, and you need a supply of neuropazine, which is the anti-rejection drug that cybernetically enhanced people you have to use. And eventually you have to go find some supplies of this, and that leads into other things. But honestly, the plot doesn't really go anywhere. You never really feel at any point that this plot is going to develop very far. It's a friggin' iOS game. And from the very beginning, it makes it abundantly clear that this isn't going to actually add anything to the Deus Ex universe. It's just this almost fan-fiction-y style storyline that never really goes anywhere. It just exists as this kind of standalone thing where they took a few liberties here and there and greatly simplified everything that you would see in Deus Ex Human Revolution. And so the actual plot doesn't really have much role-playing in it like the previous game did, or the previous games to that. And it really doesn't feel much like a Deus Ex plot, even though it centers around the same sort of ideas. The execution is just incredibly poor here. You don't give a crap. So it falls to the gameplay to save it. How's the gameplay? Well, if you've played Deus Ex Human Revolution, a lot of the mechanics are going to be relatively familiar to you. There's still the cover mechanic, there's still stealth, there's still augmentations to upgrade your character, there's still a variety of weapons available to you, that sort of thing. But they've changed some things up. For one, it's designed around iOS controls, which means that everything is incredibly simplistic. And the interface is very clearly designed around a touchscreen rather than PC, which means that a lot of the PC interface just doesn't work right. It's pretty annoying. You'll try to click some things and it may take a couple of clicks to actually get them to work. And it doesn't really do a very good job of making it clear what's going on when you do that. Whether you just didn't hit it in the right spot or whatever. It's just a weird, glitchy problem that the game has. So, what does it control like if it's an iOS game? Well, it controls a lot like Deus Ex Human Revolution did, only simpler and clunkier in every single regard. You still have a lot of the same systems, like I said, a lot of the systems that I've mentioned already, but there's also things like the hacking system, which you've seen in this video. It's the exact same thing that you had in Human Revolution. Difference being that it's a bit more finicky when you actually click on things. The gameplay itself, in theory, should be fine because it's basically lifted directly from Deus Ex Human Revolution, right? Wrong! It's built around iOS, and it didn't translate well. So what you have here is a first-person shooter mixed with RPG elements. Your augmentations are your RPG elements, as in you can spend praxis to actually upgrade your character, get different augmentations that will give you enhanced strength, better hacking abilities, stealth abilities, all sorts of different things like that. And you can see in the video here that there's quite a bit of a variety of things that you can get. Thing is, you get them pretty quickly, because the game's pretty short, and it's obviously made for iOS, so, I mean, you know, it's going to be short. and you find that they aren't all that necessary. You see, in Human Revolution, they opened up a lot of areas that you could run around in. In this, the emphasis on exploration has been greatly diminished. It's still there, but you don't get as many rewards for it. Instead, you find that you can do most things through the in-game shop. And here's another thing that's kind of weird. The way that you handled weapons and such in Human Revolution was that you had to go to a specific place, and then you would spend your credits on weapons, ammunition, weapon mods, that sort of thing. Here, they sort of have that same system, difference being that you can open the shop at any time during gameplay, and use the in-game credits to purchase whatever the hell you want. And it's just instantly in your inventory. Inventory management is gone. It's incredibly simplistic. So, what you're left with is this system that makes no sense whatsoever. Where the hell are you getting this stuff, for example? You're just in the middle of a combat zone, and combat itself, and suddenly you can just magically have more ammunition, or magically have, instead of just your dinky pistol and a shotgun perhaps, well, now you've got your combat rifle and you're good to go. Well, where did that come from? Good question, right? It's a system that doesn't really make sense and really screams of the game being an iOS game where there's probably microtransactions. And you would actually pay real money to get all this stuff just suddenly, out of nowhere. It's actually rather annoying and completely destroys the pacing of the game. You just open up the shop, out of nowhere. Pause the game while doing it, because it automatically pauses the game. Well, now you've got full health because you picked up this health item. Woo! It's not to say that the game is super easy, well, it is, but if you do manage to get into a combat scenario, you're just screwed. The enemies in this game are somehow incredibly accurate, even on the lower difficulty settings, and just do a massive amount of damage to you. So, you would expect the weapons to be up to the task. They're not. In fact, the shooting is one of the weakest parts of the game. You find that instead of the overpowered suppressed pistol combination that you had in the original game, or not original game, the technically third game, Human Revolution, you find that the pistol is practically useless this time around. Good luck hitting anything. You can't aim now. You gotta rely on the crosshairs, which are kind of huge on the screen. And if you're in cover, well, you're just screwed, because in Human Revolution, you could actually aim from around cover, and you could very easily do that. In this, you pretty much just have to click and hope that your bullets hit what you're aiming at, or sort of aiming at. It's kind of hard to do that, because the shooting, instead of being able to aim, you just pop up and fire a shot, which also exposes you to enemy fire, of course, and you move rather slowly, so that becomes a problem. You find that the shooting becomes infuriating. So what do? You stick with the stealth system, which is broken, because the AI is extremely stupid. And they're incredibly easy to fool. There's a variety of ways to take enemies down stealthily. You will be seeing it in this video, where I'm just sneaking around and using the stun gun and using stealth takedowns, and it's incredibly easy to do throughout the entire game. And when you get into a combat scenario, you think, well, Human Revolution's combat was actually pretty solid. Not here. It's just infuriating and broken. Much like everything else in this game. Broken. I guess that's the way you have to completely sum up this particular title. It's just broken. In every respect. It doesn't play well by any stretch of the imagination. I can't even see how you'd be able to play it on iOS. The controls are incredibly clunky despite being pretty straightforward. The systems are broken across the board. The upgrades are just incredibly unsatisfying. The weapons themselves are practically useless. The combat is infuriating. And the stealth is broken. The level design is linear. Much more linear than Human Revolution was, which is saying something, because Human Revolution had some pretty linear levels in it. This has worse, but then again, it is an iOS game. And it makes that abundantly clear even in the tutorial segment, where the game treats you like a friggin' idiot who has no idea how to play a first-person shooter of any kind. You have to actually specifically do what the thing tells you, otherwise it just won't do anything. You gotta follow the leader and wait for him to open doors for you, and crouch when it tells you to crouch. Do all sorts of things when it tells you to do all sorts of things. Otherwise, it won't let you continue. It just stops you in your tracks, and you like, oh, well, I'm supposed to walk through this area. Okay, let's try to sprint through because I'm in a hurry and I've already completed this tutorial before. Nope, it won't let you do that. Really? Gee, thanks, game. The tutorial lasts quite a while, too, and it's rather annoying. And should you want to restart the game, well, you have to play through the entire tutorial again. There's no option to skip it. There's no option to turn that off. The entire game is just a complete mess. And it's horrible as a result. The name Deus Ex The Fail is completely appropriate here. I don't comprehend how they managed to screw literally everything that Human Revolution did up and not fix it on PC. I can see where it would be a mess trying to port it over to iOS, but you would think that they would have actually just used the Human Revolution engine and ported the game files and everything over to that engine so it would work just fine on PC. But no, they didn't. They just straight up ported the iOS version, and it is just awful as a result. I give it a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.